All right, welcome to the Creating Clients podcast, where we're on a mission to help 1,000 freelancers get their first client and transition from employee to entrepreneur. So, the topic for today, we're going to be looking at how to overcome the feast and famine cycle. This is something that is really common in the industry. So, Jonathan's here with me. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, good to be here.
So, we're going to dissect this, talk about how we think about it, and hopefully be able to give you guys some actionable things that you can start applying in your individual practices. So, Jonathan, did you want to just set the scene a little bit and just talk about why this is important in this sphere?
I think it's kind of fairly self-explanatory, right? Like the fears of getting into business for yourself or going out as an entrepreneur. It's like, okay, well, it's risky, right? Like, where's work going to come from? And yeah, it's the opportunity as well as the risk. Like, it is a legitimate. You don't always know kind of what's going to happen next. My personal belief on the matter, and in my own experience, I feel like things have worked out that I didn't realize why they worked out until after the fact.
Yeah.
Right? Like sometimes you're in the right place at the right time, or you just have the right connections, or you don't realize that after the fact. But I think there are things that can be done to minimize a lot of what most of us can't experience that we describe as feast or famine cycle. I think there's things you could do.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I guess what I experienced early on, actually, it was when we first met and you started coaching and I started winning more customers. And I had that experience. And I remember the first time I hit a 5-figure month, and I was like, this is so cool. You know, we're growing fast. And, you know, then the next month was like $3,000. It was like, and that was to support 2 people. And I realized how you can have, you know, when you're freelancing, you can have some months where you're doing brilliant, and you can be very, very close on the heels of that and making absolutely nothing. And so, basically, I think this is one of the things that we need to figure out in order for people to be able to do this in a sustainable way. You need to figure it out, because when you're in a position where you don't have much responsibility, you know, you don't have a mortgage and a family, you know, it's kind of easy to just get by on what works. But especially when you have other demands, commitments in your life, it becomes much, much more important to have a more predictable flow of income.
I think it's worth saying that there's a degree to which I believe, like in the service business, there's some unavoidability of it. Like there is going to be cycles because you're ultimately dependent on the, the work that you're doing for someone else. And it's usually to a lesser degree than, say, in the product business where you're spread across a lot of customers, right?
Yeah.
That said, so I think it's important to acknowledge that and then plan accordingly for that. Yeah. Like in general, you know, a lot of agencies, freelancers will struggle at certain times of the year. Well, it happens cyclically. We'll touch on that a bit. But I think it's important. So it's important to acknowledge the nature of the service business. I personally believe, though, there's a lot that you can do to minimize the risks to yourself and put you in a better position to provide value to your clients through that consistency and not dipping so deeply into the famine cycle or going too far up into the feast cycle. Like that can also be negative.
Yeah. And so I guess we've sort of already touched on some of it, but just for the sake of highlighting some of them, what do you think are the main causes? What are the reasons for the dips? So there's the seasonality of it, but are there any other big things that you see that are key contributors to the feast and famine cycle when you actually drop off?
One thought that comes to mind, I think it's maybe important just to put a little pin on. I think a lot of us might assume that having like lots and lots of work, like the feast cycle, is an inherently good thing. And I just want to like put a pin that because we're going to focus mostly, for a lot of us, it's like, well, we want to avoid the famine time.
Yeah.
Right. And I just want to put out there that it's like neither, because the famine time can actually be an incredibly valuable time to work on things that matter to you. Like you can use that, right, to kind of work on honing your craft, et cetera. But I just want to put a pin before we talk about some of the whys on the upside isn't necessarily a good thing, because if you get stretched too thin, then your service level is going to suffer. Your creativity can suffer as you're pulled in too many directions. So that said, I think the why, one of the contributing factors is often a hyper focus on too much of one thing.
Yeah.
As a solopreneur or part of a very small team, it's very easy to focus on, and natural even to focus on like what's right in front of you.
Yeah.
Serving your current clients versus business development, harvesting versus planting seeds that you may not see the result of for another season or two, or longer, right? And it's really important to be doing both of that.
Yeah.
Um,
There's,
go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, just a practical thing. I know this about myself, and that is, if I allow my attention to focus on any individual thing that I'm doing, that tends to absorb me completely, right? I tend to pour myself completely into where I put my attention. And so this is something that I've been trying to be more intentional about, particularly over the last 6 months or so, choosing where I put my attention, because I know if I put my attention on something, I know I'm going to be pushing that particular thing much harder than anything else. And so as an example, there's, projects that are outside of my work, which are great projects. I run another podcast with some friends and that sort of thing. And a lot of those things rely on me, but I've been intentionally not focusing on them, not giving attention to it. I've been doing the minimum, making sure it continues to run, but I've been putting the minimum attention on it because I know if I get invested in that, then my other projects like my work and this podcast as an example is going to suffer. And so right now, my focus is squarely on this project that we're doing. And so I'm trying to put my attention and focus here. And I think for anybody, if you're doing that in the context, like you were saying, Jonathan, of a sowing and harvest cycle, and you're focusing on fulfillment, you're focusing on doing the harvesting, eventually when you get through harvesting, if you then have to go and say, oh, now I need to plant more seed, you're going to be at a place where everything's going to be much more painful and much more difficult to get back on top.
This is why I've had to learn to minimize how many games I play at a time.
Yeah.
Too much time on that. Just speaking to that for a moment. One of the things that I found personally really helpful, I don't know another way for myself, the type of person I am, because I am all about focusing on the thing that I believe matters most in that moment. So I've worked hard to identify and cultivate like tiny habits that are like, all right, do a little bit of this every day, do a little bit of that are the equivalent in our example here to planting seeds that may or may not ever yield anything. But if you didn't plant them at all, just nothing would happen.
Yeah.
So that's been important for me to identify little ways to like play to my strength, do the focus, like focus on delivery, focus on going all in on a thing, but make sure that you've figured out some ways to be making progress.
Yeah.
So that's the hyper focus point.
So, and of course, we sort of touched on it a little bit before, but there are other external factors, right? That when you're coming up to the end of year, people, potential clients may be focused on other things. And so sometimes it can just be more difficult in certain seasons.
Yeah. It's interesting. Let me just call it, I have a bias here that it's important to absolutely acknowledge external factors. Things happen that you just can't control. In general, though, I find in my own experience and in my observations of others that we tend to give more weight to external factors than I believe that they warrant.
Yes.
We can't change the things that happen around us. We can control how we react to them. And it's easy to have something happen where you get discouraged and you miss an opportunity that you could create because of those change in factors.
Yeah.
When there's polarizing events or economic downturns, it's interesting to see the companies that actually become stronger in those moments. While people that are with similar context, similar approaches, similar business models are complaining about the external factors or this or that, they just can't do it. Like there's a problem with the system. Others are like, well, no, we figured out what we can do and we're going to do that.
Yes, absolutely. I was talking to a business owner once who had quite a successful business with quite a number of staff. And I asked him what he perceived to be the key to his success. And his answer was that everything is my fault. And I asked him to explain what he meant by that. And what he was getting at was, if I don't take responsibility for something, I can't affect change. And so if there's ever a problem with my staff, or there's a problem with marketing, or there's a problem with anything, I'm just going to naturally assume that it's a deficiency on my part. And so therefore it's my responsibility to find a solution to that problem. And I thought that, obviously you could take that in the wrong way, but understood correctly, I think that's a really good and healthy way of looking at it.
I'd be so bold as to say that I think that's at the heart of the feast and famine issue, right? Like I've since recently leaving the agency world, I've been on my own for a couple months now. I've experienced some of the feast, I've experienced some of the famine, And ultimately, I feel that I have more to do with my reality than anyone else.
Yeah.
So, which puts me in a good place to say, okay, well, what can I do next? This isn't working. This is working. Let's do more of this. Let's do less of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's super important. That notion of like, hey, if it's not working, let's start with me,
Yeah.
and not blame the, oh, it's a tough market, or oh this, or oh that client couldn't see that, or oh whatever.
Mm-hmm.
No, get back to work.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I guess the last one that we were chatting about previously was poor service. So when we are
Yes.
not necessarily providing the service that we're supposed to be providing, then that's going to naturally lead people to, well, lead clients to leave us alone, right? Our reputation will precede us.
So this is a tough one. This has been tough for me. It's clear to me, like I want every client that who engages with me to feel that they're getting the most value they can get, that it's like it's an incredible value. When you're in a famine cycle, it is kind of natural to like prioritize your efforts on like securing new clients, right? And
Yeah.
that makes sense. If you're not careful though, you're going to do so at the loss of what you have. Like it's easy to sort of take for granted. And again, this is where I mean it's multifaceted, and part of it depends on how you as an individual approach things. But for me, it's like, all right, what can I do to make sure? So I schedule days to work on clients, right? So I'm like, whether I feel like it or not, I have a commitment to this client, and even though part of me wants to focus on the next thing, hey, it's time to take really good care of this current thing.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, well, you'll lose what you have, and you'll be worse off than you were.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I guess we've highlighted a lot of the causes, but how do we then correct for it? What are some of the things that we can do?
So I think the two things stand out from my own experience. But this is within the realm of like what I can control. So one of the things that I've done successfully in the past, and I see as an applicable model, is to say, okay, who am I trying to serve? Like who's my audience? And this can be, there's a lot of ways you can kind of approach this without getting into a broader topic of like picking a particular market. It's like it can be as simple as like who do I want to work with? Maybe you already know some clients that you'd like to work with. And one of the things that I've done is started. So the first thing is like cultivating a list of saying, all right, these are the top 20. These are the folks that I'd love to work with. So what I keep is a spreadsheet where it's like, all right, these are my top 20, where I see opportunity in the next 90 days to create value where they're happy to pay me for that value.
Yeah.
And so having that list, and if you don't have that list, that's a helpful indicator of like, okay, I don't have a clear direction either. I don't know who I want to work with, et cetera. If I have that list, then I know that there's steps that I can be doing to either can rule out that there's an opportunity there by them telling me no, in which case I'm going to find someone else to put on the list, or guide it to an opportunity. So that for me, it's like if you can't come up with a top 20, that may give you some really helpful clues about where you're struggling. Right? Yeah. If you're in a local area, for instance, and you're just starting from scratch, you might say, okay, I'm gonna pick 20 local businesses that I'd like to work with that met some certain criteria. So I found that really helpful to have a personal, like these are the top 20 relationships where I see opportunity right now, and sort of for me to track the status and then make sure that I'm like investing in those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that is, I guess, attached to that is when you know exactly who it is that you're reaching out to, you've got so much more power because you can stalk them, right? You can look at them online. You can see what their presence has, what it doesn't have. If you're just advertising blindly and you're saying, "Hey, I build websites. Who can I help?" That's a really, really broad thing that not many people care about. Very few people are looking in their newsfeed and saying, oh, wow, they build websites. I want them to build one for me. It just doesn't happen. You need to have something very, very, very targeted. You need to be able to deliver clear value to them that they can see and say, yes, I'm willing to spend multiple thousands of dollars on that value that you're going to provide.
Yes. Another concept that's been a big thing for me in the past, and I've touched the edges of a few times and I'm now working back towards, is the concept of a waiting list. Like getting to a point where you're saying no that you identify what your capacity is, and beyond that capacity, you're inviting and enrolling folks in a waiting list. Say, hey, I'd love to work with you. I don't have capacity right now, but I'm going to put you on the waiting list.
Yeah.
That does a number of things. Like that puts you in a state. There's a lot of value to that. That might be worth its own topic. But in general, that gives you the confidence of knowing that if circumstances change, if you finish your project sooner, and whatever it is, you have other opportunities. So,
it's also far superior to just being off. If you are in, like you were saying, in the feast cycle and people are coming to you and saying, yeah, I want to work with you. If you take them on anyway, then, service is going to go down like we were talking about before. Yep. If you just say no, they're going to go somewhere else. But if you communicate the waiting list concept and they can wait for you, they will wait for you, especially if they see value.
So that's a big thing. And ultimately, one of my indicators of personal success in my sort of the economic engine of my consulting practice is the size of my waiting list. Yeah. If there's people who because the reality is if you're good at what you do, you can't serve all the people that you could serve who'd want you, like if you're doing well. So a waiting list to me is a helpful indicator that I've got something right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if I'm just taking everything that comes, I'm not being selective enough. And most likely, and I'm also going to stretch myself too thin. So the first step of like identifying who I want to work with, and then the other facet of that is over time cultivating the waiting list.
Yeah,
those are really helpful concepts for me.
Yeah, and is there anything else that you would recommend specifically in the area of increasing deal flow? Getting more regular customers in.
So I start in general with who do I want to work with. The other factor in this, and this is something that I've enjoyed the privilege of quite a bit over the years, is doing work that positions you so that people are reaching out to you. And this can look very different depending on who you're serving. So I'm hesitant to like even be too specific, but the broad principle is to be doing work that in a way that's appropriate to your expertise, that puts your expertise out there for others to benefit from more broadly. Seth Godin talks about this in his book, This is Marketing. Publish freely your ideas, your best ideas, the ones that are worth spreading, and then charge expensively for the application of those ideas. And that's something that I adhere to is like, I'm going to focus on doing the hard work, getting my ideas in writing to be shared broadly. I don't expect those. I don't measure those in terms of what like they bring in. Like I measure them when I write. I often write with a particular individual in mind. I measure whether it was useful for that individual. What I found to be the case in my experience is doing so puts my work out in front of a broader audience, and as a consequence, people will reach out. They'll say, "Hey, I came across this. Is there an opportunity?" Yeah. So that's another important factor is identifying ways to get your expertise out there. My tip for that, because this is not a new notion, lots of people talk about, content, et cetera. My biggest thing, the thing in my own experience is don't write for a blank face. Like don't write for a broad audience. When I write these days, I write with specific individuals in mind, and I'll publish it publicly in most cases where it's appropriate to do so. But I share it with a specific individual, and my measure for success is if it was helpful for them. And what I've often found to be the case is if it's helpful for the individual I targeted, that I wrote, pardon me, recovering from a cold. If it's helpful for that individual, there's a good chance it's going to be helpful for others as well. So that's been a key thing for me.
And just to put a fine point on that, while we were chatting, I just looked up some of the articles that you have published in the past, and I'm noticing the date of publishing on them is like 2012, right? So this is, you've published a lot in the past that you're still receiving benefit from. Because if I recall correctly, you're saying you still get inquiries based on some of those posts.
That's correct. Yes, I still have people who reach out from work that I did. Wow, it's like 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, importantly, one of the mistakes, maybe not one, but a regret of mine is that I didn't keep planting seeds through my writing in the past 5 years. So I picked it up again. I've started publishing again. I'm already seeing some of the benefits of that. Writing, at least for me, is very squarely in that seed planting and accordingly like fairly difficult.
Hmm.
Like it takes time, it takes energy, it takes proactive, conscious effort.
Yeah.
But like I never regret it.
Hmm. Yeah, and this is one of those things, I've always believed that it doesn't matter what skill you have, particularly if you're in a service-based industry, right? You're a skill-based industry. Then when you can multiply your impact and multiply your opportunities by doing two things. One is being able to write well, and secondly is being able to speak well. If you can do those things on top of any skill, you set yourself above 95% of the competition immediately.
Yes. Good news is those are learnable skills.
Yes.
So don't like one of the a writing coach that I worked with. She made a point of ensuring that people understood that we are all writers. If you have the technical ability to write, you are a writer. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
Yeah.
You just, like anything, have to develop it and learn, and it's all very learnable.
Yeah, that's good. That is encouraging. So, just to shift focus, because we've spoken pretty clearly about how to be maintaining the input of leads and that sort of thing. But what about recurring income? Because it's always a lot easier to keep a client than win a new one. So, what are some ways that you've tried or that you would recommend for people increasing their recurring revenue?
I'm a big fan of just structuring engagements on a recurring basis. So one of the models that I've applied successfully is to identify the number of days that I have in a given month, and then identify the number of clients I'm willing to take on, the maximum amount I'm willing to do per client, and then structure it accordingly. So in general, I try to work no more than a maximum of 4 days a month per client. That's a model that works for me. So that part of it is considered the model that you're going to take. If you're taking a project-based model, there's a number of different considerations. Like some folks will spread the project out and sort of set it up on a recurring basis. I think sometimes this recurring stuff can get out of hand. So you really do need to, because the idea is nice, right? Consistent, regular revenue. You just have to make sure that it really aligns well with the value proposition. So when I focus on offering recurring engagements to my clients, my general litmus is that it should feel like ridiculously high value for them.
Yeah.
And I'm going for a sweet spot of like something that I can sustain, but I don't ever want someone to feel forced into the model just because it's good for me.
Yeah, no, that's a good thought. So I meant for me in my business, one of the big benefits that I have had over the years, when I first started, I don't really even know why I did. It was just something that seemed to make sense at the time. But I purchased a multi-hosting account that I could sell off to my clients, and I just did that. And I never assumed that would make me any significant money. It was just a way to serve my customers better. And over time, then I started to realize that, I'm actually starting to build up recurring income, so it got down to the place where it's like, I'm getting few extra $100 here and $100 there, $100 there, and it builds up over time. And so that was one aspect of it. So reselling hosting, in hindsight, as much of a blessing as the recurring income aspect of it is, it has been a mixed blessing, because then that also means that I become a help desk operator as well. And so
expectations,
yeah, exactly. And so I have I've hybridized it now. So basically any customers I have that I know are going to be higher touch customers in the hosting area, like if I know they've got loads of email accounts and all the rest of that, I will not host them myself. I will directly connect them with a host that's going to do the job for them. Sometimes I get customers and I know that they're the kind of people that are never going to need any help whatsoever. They just need something really simple. And so in those cases, I will host those customers. So I would say, if you think this is a great idea for recurring income, it is. But make sure that you're only taking the right kind of customer. Otherwise, you'll just end up spending all of your time doing what you shouldn't be doing.
That's a generally important point is, are you working with customers that you are really going to want to work with?
Yes. Yeah. And so the other thing that I do personally is maintenance. So when I do a project for someone in my practice, I take on projects that are lower value than what you do. So for me, most of my clients are, I don't know, in the $5,000 to $20,000 area, wherever they happen to fall in the spectrum. But in that area, I tend to offer a couple of different levels of maintenance. So there's like a reactive maintenance and a proactive maintenance plan that I offer. So at the reactive level, that's basically if something breaks, they can just call me and I'll fix it for them. And for that, I charge $500 a year. So basically, that's a peace of mind fee. So if something happens, they don't have to worry about it. I'm there. If they have a question, they can call me, and I'm happy with that.
Yep.
I do that on the assumption I don't give them a figure and say you can only call me X amount of times. I just leave that open ended. But generally speaking, I work on the assumption that they're not going to contact me more than 5, maybe 8 times a year, and it's only going to be a few minutes to sort out whatever it is. If I've got a client that's consistently over and above that, I'll talk to them and say, look, this package probably isn't necessarily what you're after, and we can negotiate on that. I've never had an issue. It's always worked out quite well for me. On the other end of it, the proactive maintenance would be I'm going to be checking in on their website at a regular interval, and of course I charge them more for that, and that varies. I have one customer that's on that, and they do, and I've got them for like $2,500 a year based on what their needs are. So basically, as you do that, you start to build up a base level of residual income that makes it easier to plan for the famine times, basically.
Yeah, I like that. One thought on setting this stuff up that I've had drilled in a couple of times is the best time is before. Well, it's important to put the effort up front into really getting the engagements right. I've had multiple situations where at close to the last moment I change the pricing, which often for me is like doubling the pricing of like recurring engagements. And when they've said yes, I've been very grateful that I took the energy and the time up front and the risk, even because someone can walk away. But I've seen and I've experienced, once someone's in a recurring engagement, no client wants you to go back to them and tell them you've doubled the price next year.
Yeah.
So I think it's sometimes as entrepreneurs, we're too quick to like, all right, I want this business. And so I want to make sure that they say yes. And so it'll be fine. I'll kind of work itself out. No, you need to make sure. Are you really going to be happy with this deal?
Yeah.
Like, expect the worst case scenario. And are you still happy with it?
Yeah, that is a good thought. And one other thing that I would mention is don't necessarily put off thinking about this. If you're thinking, yeah, this is great, I'll get my business running and then I'll figure it out later. The sooner you figure these things out, the less pain and the more positive results in the long run. Because for me, this concept of actually working on getting recurring income is comparatively new. I've only been doing it for, a couple of years really. And if I had have been doing this from the start, I could easily be having, $30,000, $40,000 of passive income per year at this point based on how many people I've served and who could potentially have been good clients for me, but I have let those opportunities slide. So yeah, definitely get onto that sooner than later.
Yeah, I think it's also just on that point because when you're first starting out, like you won't know. It's better to have a direction and change the direction than just sort of like go with the flow. Because if you do that, your business will end up being shaped. Sometimes you'll be fortunate, it'll work out well, but your business will often be shaped randomly based on who showed up next.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's a missed opportunity for each of you as entrepreneurs. Say, hey, all right, who do I really want to work with? What am I here to do? What do I care about? And let me find the opportunities and set myself up for the opportunities that are in line with that thing I care about.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you do organize for recurring, it's good to think outside the box. And this is going to be different for different people, right? Because some people are naturally going to have a different skill set, and so figure out where your strengths are and play to that. Decide, you might be building websites for small businesses, sure, but there may be a certain area that works for you. Tailor your offering around that, and so the things that you're accumulating in your recurring stack are the things that are your specialty and what you want to do.
Yes, that's a big deal.
If you're, as an example, if you're a developer, then it makes sense to be getting retainers for development for customers. If you're building websites but you're really passionate about content, then sell content writing packages along with what you do. So that goes for all disciplines really, right? Like SEO, online marketing, any of the above.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the general thing, because if you've structured it well, these are going to last a long time. Make sure that you're happy with what you've built.
Yes, for sure. There was a great, there's a great service. I can't even remember where I came across it, but basically it was for conversion rate optimization, and the guy's name's Nick, and his surname escapes me, but his company is draft.nu, and I know I'm giving him a shout out, but I just think he's got a really interesting, really good business model, and it's not as clear on his site now as it used to be, but he used to be really, really clear on his site that he would do a review of the client's site as far from a conversion optimization standpoint, and he would do a new review. I think it was either monthly I think it was, or quarterly, and you could pick frequency, but basically you would say, yes, please review on a quarterly basis, and he was charging, my brain's feeling foggy here, but it was $500,000, something like that, for a report. And so basically he had everything in place, and so he had all the knowledge. So he was just generating a report, writing, his analysis of it and sending it off. And every time he would sign up one of those customers, he's got that guaranteed coming in on the monthly or quarterly basis moving forward. And I was just like, that makes so much sense from a business perspective, because it's very scalable. His time commitment is considerably minimal to the money that would be coming in and for it. There's a number of things that are really good about that sort of a model.
So valuable is the sort of the compound effect of like, all right, you're doing this a lot, you're going to get better and better at it. There's a lot more value you can put into it.
And we actually had one of our coaching community members. I haven't actually checked back in with her for some time, but she was working on a model where she wasn't charging for websites up front, but she was including maintenance and giving a higher monthly cost. And I can't remember what that was. Maybe it was like $50 a month or $70 a month or something like that. But she had an agreement where every X number of years, she would update, like rebuild the site or whatever it was. And so, again, predictable monthly numbers that can be rolling through the accounts. So.
Love it. Very good.
So, yeah, before we sort of start to wrap it up, any other specific ideas for recurring income in our space?
I think one thing that's important to call out in general, it's easy to overlook what you already have. So your existing client relationships, are you looking at ways to add additional value to those you're already serving? The people who are most likely to buy from you are those who are already happy with what they're buying.
Yeah.
So I just call that out as a general notion. Like, we're often too shy about going to the people who already know us, like you're kind of ignoring what's right in front of us. So being creative and thinking about, hey, what can I do to provide my existing clients with more value? Yes. And using the relationship that you have with them to, present the idea to them and get their candid feedback.
Yeah, just as an idea or an example of what you're talking about, I had a client that I built a website for. It was a very simple website. They didn't have very significant needs. It was something very simple that I put together for them. And sometime later, they I'm not a photographer, right? Like that's not my day job sort of thing, but I do enjoy it. And they happened to mentioned that they were going to be getting some photography done, and I was straight with them. I said, look, I'm not a professional photographer, but this is what this is some of the work that I've done. If you want me to do it for you, I'm happy to. I would enjoy doing that. And they said they were very happy for me to do that because they knew me. It was something that was for them. They didn't have to then go and build a relationship with another person. They were fully aware of my skill level, and they were happy for me to do that for them. And I told them, I said, if you're not happy with it at the end of the day, you don't pay me for it. It's that simple, Well, so there was no pressure on me, and there was also no pressure on them for it to be a winner. But if you just keep an eye out for their needs and compare that with your skill set, then there's often opportunities that you're leaving on the table.
Love it.
So with that, I guess that's probably the end of the thoughts for this episode. But if you guys have any specific questions, please, by all means, jump onto the website, creatingclients.io, and let us know. We'd love to hear more from you guys. And if we can answer the questions live on the show, we'd be more than happy to do that. So until then, keep doing what you're doing. We look forward to producing more content and talking to you guys again soon.